We're here for the fourth episode of the L's. Obviously, we're in different circumstances right now. We are working and being creative at home due to this pandemic, but obviously we're not stopping in terms of creating content. We have an incredible guest and also a good friend of mine, Diego Farias. Did I pronounce that right?
Farias.
Farias. Diego Farias, who's the co-founder and CEO of Amuse, joining us for episode 4 of the L's, aka Lessons Learned. What's up, Diego? How's everything back home?
It's interesting. You know, it's like we're living in this experiment, and we're all getting to see how it's affecting all of us, I guess. But I'm in Sweden right now. I was supposed to be on the road. I guess around this time of the month, I was supposed to be heading over to New York to go see what was going on with the first Digilogue meetup. But yeah, it's definitely been an interesting month and a half or something like that. But everything is good in Sweden. Life goes on, I guess. And my family and myself, we're staying healthy. The company is powering on from isolation, but it's all good, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing that I know a lot of people obviously are kind of indirectly affected through the pandemic, depending on where you are. But I think family-wise, I think with my immediate circle, like we're all safe and healthy. But
happy to hear.
Yeah, I'm grateful. But, you know, from a digital standpoint, obviously we've all been pivoting. I know we had Digilogue Day lined up for, March 28th, which was an all-day event, which you guys were a co-title sponsor for. But it looks like this is going to be pushed more towards, obviously, the end of the year or top of 2021, just how things are in New York. But nonetheless, we're still going to pump up content. We have a lot of great things that we're going to be collaborating on. But more importantly, I wanted to introduce you because, you know, you've been obviously kind of like behind the scenes within our community. We connected about almost 2 years ago, kind of through mutual people. And then we've done a few things. We did like a little event in LA, which you guys participated in.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've always been in touch every time you've been in New York. We we always catch up, and you actually came to like one of our Digilogue events.
I did, yeah.
A year ago.
I think around a year ago or 9-10 months ago. I mean, having kind of followed it from the sidelines, I don't get the opportunity to come every time, of course, but it was fantastic to see kind of the gathering of people and minds that you guys have put together, and it was a great testament to the whole Digilogue kind of purpose, or whatever you want to call it. So it was a fantastic experience. I met this guy, actually. I don't know if I told you, but I met this guy who had been on Amuse from 2 months after we launched or something like that. So random guy walks up to me and he's like, "Diego, I've been on Amuse for this long time. I can't remember exactly how many months." And I had to look him up in the back end, and I was like, wow, this was like one of our first 100 users or something like that. And he just randomly approached me, and he was like, "So what do you do?" I was like, "I work at Amuse." He was like, "So what do you do there?" I was like, "I run Amuse." He was like, "What?" So that was a chance encounter. I know, right?
No, what I do appreciate about you as like a CEO and a leader is that you really have your boots in the ground. You're actually in the mix of things. You're not far removed from culture and how things are happening. I think because your platform, you know, obviously it's a mobile distribution platform, but it's so artist driven that you have to be in touch. And, you know, I've seen you've been traveling across the world. I don't know how you handle like all the different time zones.
I don't, is the short answer. No, but I mean, that's what Amuse has been for the whole time. It's been this organic, crazy trip that we've all been on, and it had taken a bunch of stops in different places, and it's been an incredibly fortunate thing from that point of view to run into people across the world, meet exciting personalities like yourself, and all sorts of other people that I've ran into over the course of these last couple of years. So from that point of view, it's very exciting. And I think one of the things that I miss the most with the situation we're in right now, just being able to meet face to face over a couple of tacos or a beer or whatever the situation could be, and that's definitely one thing that's missing. But we're doing the best we can given the circumstances.
100%. So obviously for those that may not know you from the community or anyone that's joining this podcast, maybe you can give like a little background about Amuse before we kind of go back into like your history and like how you got started.
Sure. So Amuse is plain and simple a music technology service born and bred out of Sweden, where a lot of cool stuff has come out of in the last couple of years. It's a bunch of different services and tools aimed to empower independent artists, labels, their teams, or whatever it could be, around the world. And basically what we've created is a really slick distribution service built into the mobile phone. That's how we launched it. Right. On top of that, we have a web interface as well that actually a large portion of our users end up using. We've built in cool stuff like royalty advances. We have a record label sitting on top of all of this. We look at kind of trend data to see talent that we should be working on. And we just launched this cool service that we call Amuse Pro, which gives you even more kind of technology. Yeah. So yeah, it's an all encompassing type of a music technology company, whatever you want to call it. I'm getting a little bit tired of that label perhaps, but it's a modern music company for the times that we live in today. And I think, you know, it was founded with one leg in technology and one leg in music. And I think that's been one of the keys from the get-go, that it wasn't just one thing or the other, but it was always this mix of these two things. And the ambition is to continue to develop incredible services, predominantly technology, to solve a lot of the challenges that independent music, independent artists, their teams, etc., are experiencing today.
Yeah, no, well, I do appreciate, obviously, just from the kind of the uniqueness of the platform, obviously is mobile driven, you know, and then also too, like your focus in terms of artists, more so ex-US, which really is highlighting the amount of talent globally. I feel like we see pockets of it, I think, from a US standpoint, if they start to kind of cross over, but you guys really highlight, you know, the artists globally.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, when you grow up in Sweden and when you live in Sweden, it's a population of 10 million people, so you know, smaller than New York, and you never think about how are we gonna make this service work in Sweden unless you're selling milk or, you know, something that everyone needs. But when you're working in something like this, the question always from the get-go would be, how does this translate into the needs of, you know, a kid like Lil Nas X, who was a user who came up through Amuse, or, you know, how does it translate to a Latino artist in Peru or Chile, or how does it work for a kid in Hungary or Turkey or, you know, Asia or whatever it could be. So that's always the mentality from for a Swedish company, and the results of that has been that we've been able to gain insights into all of these small cool pockets around the world. Like someone came up to me some weeks ago and they were like, Diego, you know what, we have 30% market share in Pinoy rap. And I was like, whoa, that's fantastic. I know, right? The biggest Pinoy rap playlist, which we've never spent a dime in marketing in the Philippines, but somehow the service Amuse has found a user base among the Filipino rap community, and one thing leads to the other. So it's super exciting stuff like that kind of become the result of just having this global approach from day one, and not necessarily focusing in too much on one region from the get-go.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think it makes sense, particularly for those regions that are very mobile in terms of just like usage. So it makes sense, particularly for countries like the Philippines, that obviously everyone's on their phones. And
definitely.
Social. They actually really use the social DSPs as like social platforms. They love sharing.
Yeah, of course.
Music. Yeah.
But I mean, with that said, the US is one of those markets too. The US is so many different things. It's not, you know, homogenous in the same way as Sweden would be, but you know, 40% or something like that of our users are from the US. So as much as we've had, you know, global traction, a majority of our user base is still in the United States.
Yeah, that's important to note. But before we go into like obviously the semantics and details, let's kind of like retract back to like first of all, like, how did you get into music? How did you get started? You know, what inspired you?
I
Um,
don't know. I mean, I grew up around music. My father was kind of a
mhm.
Woodstock hippie. He never made it to Woodstock, I'm afraid. But my father is Chilean, from
Yeah,
Chile, left Chile around the coup, came to Sweden early 70s. And my mom has always sung. She used to sing in a choir. She still sings in a choir, actually. My younger brother is in a ska band, so shout out to ska and ska. And music has always been a part of our family. So myself and my siblings. But I don't have an education or anything like that in music, and I don't play instruments. I don't sing other than in the shower and to my wife, something I know she appreciates greatly. But you know, so my trip actually, or this journey of mine starts in technology somewhere around 2004. I had
mhm,
graduated high school. I never made it to university. I
right.
started working at a technology company. It was actually a ripoff of eBay, a Swedish version of it. That company was sold to eBay in 2006 for some $40 million.
Nice.
And after that, I just continued to go through technology companies up until around 2010 when I joined Warner Music. And the reason that Warner Music wanted me was that the Swedish Warner Music office had realized that a big transformation had happened with the introduction of Spotify, which of course is a Swedish company, SoundCloud, of course, a Swedish company as well. But these companies had started to chip away at the traditional record business, if you so wish. And the people at Warner were insightful enough to realize they needed someone with a digital background to kind of
Mhm.
help and navigate the company through the changes. And that's where I came into the picture. So I entered the music industry not necessarily because I had been working in a mailroom somewhere, or because
Right.
I ran a fan club, or because I was a big music fan,
Mhm.
although I was. But I came in from the point of view that there was a lot of change happening, and my digital background that I had through all of these internet startups that I had been at seemed to be suitable for a challenge which no one really knew what it would entail. So it needed a fairly broad background and someone with a bit of a crazy mindset like myself. And yeah, I was there for a couple of years and had a really good time at Warner Music. Although it's different working at a major than working in a startup, as
Yeah.
I don't have to tell you, Drew.
Yeah. Yeah.
All about it.
It's definitely different. And I think to your point, you talked about how these major DSPs and obviously Amuse originated from Sweden. That's
Mm,
interesting. You know, I think given that the streaming platforms between SoundCloud and Spotify really took off in Sweden. Obviously, like they're like one of the obviously like the main DSPs
yeah.
now. Just from a technology and music standpoint, was there just a lot just bubbling during that time in Sweden, just in terms of like music startups? Uh,
Well, I think it started a little bit before that. So the first wave of music and technology, or where those two sectors interact the first couple of times, is the emergence of piracy. So the Pirate Bay was a Swedish founded.
was
I
it?
don't want to call it. Yeah, I don't want to call it a company, but I guess the three founders were Swedish. Kazaa was another piracy service, which also was, originated in Sweden. So I think there was a need in Sweden to hurry up the pace of access to music
Hmm.
and the ability to play that music in the device of your choice, which to a lot of people at that time was computers.
Hmm.
So I think Swedish people started going at it in different ways. I don't necessarily encourage piracy, but I think that piracy was a symptom of the supply chain of music perhaps not working for everyone, and people wanted to be able to consume it on their computers with their headphones or speakers or whatever. So piracy started, and then that kind of led into the whole thing with SoundCloud and Spotify, which were founded roughly at the same time. And
Yeah.
then those two services obviously took a completely different direction than what the Pirate Bay did. But I think initially in Sweden, a lot of us saw Spotify as kind of the solution to piracy, and piracy being a problem that could be solved if someone would continue to innovate. And I guess the reason why people were resorting to piracy was that they wanted everything immediately and they couldn't get it immediately. And then Spotify came along and it was basically like, here, if you pay for this, then you can have it immediately. And people were okay with paying to access that type of services. So it was, but I don't know if there was anything particular in the water here, or if there was a reason why it popped up in Sweden, as opposed to, you know, I don't know, Germany or whatever, or the US for that matter. But it's a community of a lot of technology companies. I think we have something like the most unicorn companies outside of San Francisco. I might be wrong, but it's a place that have fostered a lot of strong technology companies, primarily because we got started with this thing fairly early. It's a small country. It's, I don't want to say socialist, but social democratic led, which means that, you know, we got broadband back in the 90s. People have computers and can afford technology, and all of that together kind of creates this interesting mix that
environment
perhaps allows something like that to happen in a more organic way, of course.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting because it's become a hub for music technology, similar to like Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
But just specific to music, obviously. So it's really interesting, you know, if you're a music startup, you might have to move to Sweden.
I know, right? And there are so many other ones. I mean, just one that comes, you know, off the top of my head, Epidemic Sound has been an incredible business that creates music for creators around the world. Tracklib, you know, there are all these cool companies that are, you know, doing incredibly cool stuff here in the Stockholm region. So it's an exciting place to be if you're interested in music and technology, for sure. And a lot of those learnings, of course, can be shared. It's a small place. It's 1.5 million people here in Stockholm. So I know all those guys. Of course, we know all those guys. So it makes kind of communication easier too.
That's interesting. So during this time, obviously you're running digital. When digital is brand new.
Yeah.
To everybody, right? Facebook, relatively about 5 years old.
Yep.
Twitter just hitting the scene.
Yep.
Instagram's not even there yet.
Exactly.
YouTube started. What's digital in this space? Like, what's the focus?
I don't know. I think we were all over the place, to be honest. And, you know, if someone would look at my performance back then, they would be like, Diego, maybe you could try to focus on one thing, because I feel like it was like a whack-a-mole. We were like hitting a little bit over here and a little bit over there. We were like trying to figure things out. Yeah. And, you know, I guess one of the biggest challenges was that there were very few things to benchmark against as far as results were concerned, or, you know, how did you set goals, or how were you supposed to know anything when everything was brand new? So every month was just brand new learnings. And, you know, it could be anything from like, how much money should we spend on the next Bruno Mars album to make enough money compared to what we would have made when we were selling albums? You know, there were all these learnings that we had to kind of collect at a very fast pace to be able to make an impact. And the reality was that initially when I joined Warner Music, it was still, you know, go talk to the digital guys over in the corner, and the results perhaps were not so significant because, you know, revenues were not so strong from music in that digital space yet. YouTube wasn't paying anything back then, and the Spotify revenue were, you know, really small. We didn't ever have like a real download market in Sweden, so there were no download revenues either. So it was like early days, but yeah, we were going after everything. I can't even begin to tell you. It was like this and that and this.
Yeah, no, I mean, especially it was the Wild Wild West. I mean, it was a shift. Obviously, you have streaming that's becoming a player during that time. Streaming, obviously, SoundCloud is brand new. You have independent artists uploading there, and then I think artists on Twitter are figuring out how to tweet. You know, about their music, and also a shift in like, what was it, MySpace, because MySpace is big. It kind of reached its peak. Around, I think 2012, I believe. But yeah, it was really interesting. Like that 3-year time period, I think between like 2009 and 2012 was really interesting.
Oh yeah, it was very interesting. I know a lot of the kids who participate in the Digilogue, they weren't even around back in those days. So it sounds like we're like 95 years old. But no, I mean, that was the origin of all the stuff that we're doing today. And, you know, I think a lot of us who participated way back when got to really learn things from the beginning and try to, you know, hack our way to
Mhm.
success. And it was definitely a period filled with a lot of learning on a personal level.
Right, absolutely. So when it comes to like obviously ideas and startups, there's always, I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs always want to solve a problem,
Yeah.
right? So what was like the genesis for you into like ideating Amuse and really just having those initial ideas? Where did those ideas really generate from? Like where do they come from?
Yeah, so I mean, keep in mind that I came into the music industry, not really knowing anything about the music industry. So I was kind of
Right.
learning on the job. But I think one of the things that we realized really, really early when I was at Warner Music, somewhere around 2010, 2011, was that a lot of data points were being created from all of these plays and streams and whatnot. And our assumption was that we could use those as signals of you know, stuff working. So that was
Hmm.
one of the early things that kind of got the idea started, perhaps. And then after Warner Music, I actually went to travel around sub-Saharan Africa for a year and a half. I was working for a Swedish telecommunications company.
Hmm.
And I because I still, I mean, I'm not a black belt in music still, and I've been in this industry for 10 years now. But I came to sub-Saharan Africa, and I found this, you know, parallel universe almost, where there weren't record companies and publishing companies, and you know, all of these creative artists were running around trying to figure out how to get their music into their services, and they couldn't, because they were stuck there with their, you know, cell phones, and they didn't have credit cards. They had mobile wallets. They didn't have this or that, and there were all these small technical hurdles to them participating in the music industry. And somewhere between you know, the realization that data makes sense in this new modern world, and the need for technological advancements in the world of music distribution, I think somewhere around there is the origin of the Amuse idea. So I quit my job in sub-Saharan Africa, and reached out to friends and foes from my past, and told them that I was going to start something super exciting, and I wanted them to help me out in building that. So I gathered a couple of buddies from different companies, both music and technology, and together we decided that we were going to start a business. And that's probably the most stupid thing you can do, but it's really exciting.
So you obviously you have these ideas festering.
Yeah,
As you're drawing things out. You're
yeah.
spewing ideas out. Who was the first person you reached out to? Like you're just like, hey, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, one of the first guys was this old buddy of mine, who has been running our technology since the get-go. And I told him I wanted to build this crazy service, and he didn't know anything about music distribution. He just told me, yeah, that sounds like something we can do. And he's always been like this, you know, when you have this friendly angel on your shoulder who's whispering nice stuff to you.
Yeah.
That's always been him. He's never been the mean one. He's always been the positive one, and perhaps too positive at some points, because he kind of makes me feel like I can build anything. And then
Yeah.
after that, I reached out to a friend, Andreas, who used to work at Universal. I got to know him when he was at Universal Music in the Nordics, and you know, he had a bunch of ideas on how this platform could work, and he came up with ideas like, you know, our royalty advances or the
Right.
label. So he's been incredibly instrumental to this journey. But I think, you know, I think more than the individual pieces, it's kind of what environment you create, and what that environment can make you do. Because I think, you know, there are so many different ways of doing this, but we were always co-founders, and we were always like, everyone's ideas mattered, and we were quick
Right.
to implement each other's ideas and also critique them, of course. And I
Mm.
think through that kind of friendly and great environment, I think we've been able to overcome a bunch of hurdles, but also, you know, innovate at a very, very fast pace. So for me, it's always been about the team, not necessarily each of one of the individual members.
You know, that's super important. And I'm asking this because obviously in our community we also have a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, of
So,
course.
you know, from a creative standpoint, we all have this great idea,
Hmm.
but obviously we can't do it all ourselves. So if we have an idea, who do we reach out to? What teams do we build? And how does that kind of like form organically?
Yeah.
So for you, what was kind of like the timetable? So you call your friend who is obviously your angel to the right.
Yeah.
He's the one that's the technology guy. And then
Yeah.
what's your timetable between building your team and starting to have those like early iterations and then obviously raising money to like, really launch this thing?
Yeah, so I mean, it's like playing house initially. Like
Yeah.
there's a bunch of people in the room, and no one really knows what's going on, and it's we're all trying to figure it out. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we had all been in businesses where fundraising had been a big part of the business. We had all built technology. We had all worked, or some of us had worked in music, but making all of those things kind of fit together, I think, is a challenge. So we started doing some fundraising. I've always been the fundraiser in our team. Started doing some fundraising, raised $100,000 or something like that, which
Crazy.
I can assure you is not enough to do anything. But it got us started. We
Noted.
started we started hacking away at the product, and I think 2016 we started in 2016. Early in 2016 and launched in early 2017, and between that we had a beta launch, and we had some users coming into 2017. We had been bankrupt at least once, and had probably had countless fights and frustration with each other, but
Yeah.
overcome all of those things. And in March 2017 we launched worldwide, and after what felt like 15 years, the 12-month period ended up flying by, and we launched the service, and
Right.
we're really, really excited about that.
Yeah, no, you make a couple of great points. And the thing about the Else podcast is not necessarily highlighting losses, but more so lessons learned. So
Yeah, of course.
there's a lot of lessons learned during this time frame of like really trying to ramp up and like launch Amuse. Maybe you
Mhm.
could talk about like one or two like huge lessons for anyone that's starting a company and trying to form a team and like, obviously get things launched.
Well, I mean, I don't even know where to begin. There are so many lessons learned. I guess this whole thing is just an ongoing lesson. It doesn't
Yeah,
ever end. I hope it doesn't end for anyone, because
yeah,
if you would at some point feel like you've learned everything, then I don't know what to tell you.
yeah,
But I think one of the big challenges is running a team and maintaining a team, and it comes with so many layers of challenges. It's incredible. It's everything from making sure that everyone feels seen, because even if it's a small team, how do you make sure that everyone's voice is heard and that everyone's needs are met, etc., etc. Because we all run on different things, and you have to try to figure that out really, really quickly and try to make sure that those things can be met in each individual team member. And then you won't always agree, so how do you handle that? And I
Mhm.
think a lot of startups start off with old friends and stuff like that. I guess we had the fortune, and I guess to not be, it wasn't it wasn't the tightest friends group from way back when that started this company. It was people who we had run into each other on a professional level. We knew each other primarily from work, so we knew what each one of us could and couldn't do from a work point of view. And then I think that was something that benefited us, because then you're gonna fight at times. You're gonna disagree.
Yeah,
You're gonna have different visions. You're gonna have different ideas on how to do things, and being able to overcome those in a professional way, I think, is one of the key success factors to anything. And then I think another thing about the whole team aspect is aligning on the most basic thing, which is kind of the culture. Because if everyone in the team shares the culture, or whatever that culture is that you have in your business, then everything can go kind of on autopilot, or you don't have to have a philosophical conversation about decisions, because they
right.
will come out of a place in your backbone where you share some type of a cultural DNA with the rest of your team.
Mhm.
So I think if you can, I'm nothing of this is going to be as straightforward as I make it sound, and that was not my intention either. But if you can find any type of balance between a few of these things, I think you're going to be off to an incredible start. And then that work never ends. It never sleeps. It's like a relationship. Every day you wake up and you got to prove yourself today as well. You got to work hard today as well. You can't relax on any of those things. And I think that's definitely been some of the most challenging stuff. Just, how do you run a business? How do you run a team? And especially for me, I had never been CEO before, never founded a company either. So those were two things that I haven't even mentioned, but
Yeah.
learning on the job, like, how does finance work? you know, that and other questions in Diego's own podcast.
But I like the fact that you're I think as an entrepreneur and obviously as a founder is I think the key thing that you mentioned is about always asking questions.
Mhm.
Not also understand that you don't know all the answers, and as you go, you're learning as we go, which is key because we have to kind of adapt to situations. We have to
Yeah,
listen to feedback.
yeah.
Uh, there's no right or wrong answer at that point. We just have to like get feedback and kind of see what works, and then looking at the data, like okay, cool, this we should like actually approach this.
But
Um,
Drew, I want to jump in really quickly and say that, you know, I agree with you wholeheartedly, but that's also one of the things that's incredibly difficult. And especially when you start growing the size of your team. It's
right,
one thing when you're 3 people in a basement, or 5 people in a basement, or 15
right.
people in a small office, because everyone's talking between themselves, and that creates some type of a general alignment. But
Mhm.
when you start being 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 people, then all of those things fly out the window. All wisdoms that you have from, when you started a business, you just got to scrap those, because now it's like, if you make decisions in the same fast pace without involving a lot more people, then you're going to start to find resistance to that fast pace of iterations that you're describing. And I think that's, to speak of another lesson, that's definitely been one of the big ones.
Yeah, 100%. I think especially as you grow your company, um, obviously you're not going to be able to speak to everybody, but you have leaders or team leads
Yeah,
in
of
those
course.
respective groups that obviously you trust. And yeah, I think that's like in anything. Like I know a lot of people have great ideas, but if you don't have a foundation with that core team, it's not going to go anywhere. I've learned this, in the past, and understanding how important that is in terms of culture. To your point,
Yeah,
uh, starting a new team, even like for artists, right? If you have if you're building a management team, like just making sure, like these are the people that have your core values. Yes, you're going to disagree when it
yeah,
comes to ideas and being creative, but people have your best interests at heart, and I think
yeah.
that's be
It's
tested
it's
through time.
it's never going to work to allow or to let everyone just run at the maximum pace that they can run, unless you all know roughly what direction you guys are running in. And I
Hmm.
think that's where the culture aspect comes in, where we all know what we want to try to accomplish here, and
Hmm.
then I feel confident that Drew is running around over here, but he knows exactly where he's going. We'll check in from time to time, but I trust in your ability to reach the goal. So and like you said, I think it's incredibly important lesson for anything you do in this space, whether it's as an artist, or if you're working in a startup like I do. So
Yeah.
very important point.
Yeah, so a couple lessons there, man. Having a really team from the get-go, and instilling culture to
Yeah,
obviously maintain that hustle, and making sure that the personalities are inspired, the different personalities are inspired, and then understanding as you get bigger how to communicate those ideas in a larger scale.
yes
Um,
sir.
Dope. So we talked about like the trajectory. So when you first launched Amuse,
Mhm.
what was kind of like the outreach to the artists? Like how are you guys introducing the platform?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, it was all kind of reach out to individual artists. It wasn't more thought through than that. And I think it's not to undermine that approach, because I think at the end of the day, this is a fairly or a very personal conversation that needs to take place. You're entrusting us with the art that you have created, and
Yeah.
a lot of responsibility lands on our shoulders, not only from like a technical point of view, can we deliver this, but can we also collect your revenues in a good way? Can we pay you out in time? Is there a person you can talk to? There's all of these different things that come into play. So we've always grown organically, and we've always grown through artists telling each other. So for us, it was incredibly important from the beginning to start meeting as many people as possible. And I remember, our Andreas, who I mentioned before, who ran our label back in those days. he was having meetings every day, every night, basically. It was revolving doors in our office, which at that point was actually a garage. So that was an exciting time. So we had a bunch of people coming
Humble
through, and
beginnings.
a lot of, sorry.
Humble beginnings.
Humble beginnings, yeah. I don't miss those days, but it was an exciting time. But we had a lot of people coming through. We met a lot of people. We talked to a lot of artists. We tried to understand where they were coming from, what they needed, and try to explain to them what we were trying to accomplish. And I think somewhere from there, it has kind of snowballed into all of the different things that we do today. But for us, the meeting with the artist, whether that's digital or face to face, has always been incredibly important. And that goes back to what we talked about in the beginning.
Right.
Me traveling around the world and meeting a lot of people. We have other people who do the same and interact with people and shake hands and drink coffees and from on occasion a beer or two. And I think that continues to be the most fundamental part of how we've grown our business.
100%. I feel like you're not just a company that puts a technology solution out and expect to engage with it.
Yeah.
Artists, they need to, there a lot of artists now are very educated. They're digitally savvy. You want to understand what benefits them, and you need to be able to like inform them and also have that like that one-on-one experience sometimes too for those that obviously may be resistant to using it.
Yeah, of course, and we get a lot of that, and I reach out to people who decide not to use Amuse. I just want to find out what their thinking is and make sure that perhaps next time they consider our service. So this is also one of those things that if you run out of curiosity, if you run out of interest, and if you get tired of doing this, then it's probably time to pack your bag and get on your way, because there's no room in this industry if you're not actively seeking the interaction with people in the industry, artists, managers, producers, whatever it could be. So that's one of the things that we do. We spend a lot of time on, and I'm always interacting with people. My poor Instagram inbox is an absolute mess. My LinkedIn is an absolute mess. My email inbox, a lot of people have questions, and you got to take the time to answer that every time. I was watching this documentary. I don't know if you saw it on Netflix about Clive Davis. And one of the things that people keep getting back to was that Clive always took the meeting. He always had, people had the impression at least that he always had time for them. And I think I hadn't seen that documentary when I started Amuse, but for me, that personal interaction has always been at the forefront of how I conduct my business. So I think it's something that's in the core of Amuse DNA as well.
No, I mean, I appreciate it just because, at least for the Digilogue, we're so community and artist and creative driven that, we have to be able to be accessible. It might be a good 5 to 10 minutes just to kind of catch up or like respond to a text. Obviously, we're all busy, but to create that intimacy, that personal relationship in some capacity is so important, especially for artists, because they want to feel like they're part of this. It's not just like they're part of a platform, but that you actually care about that the most important thing that's important to them is their music.
Of course.
Other than family and friends. But, I think to kind of focus on that and really personalize the platform versus just like making more technology leaning, but it's really just about the culture that you guys are creating as you travel to these different countries. And building those
100%.
relationships.
100%, yeah.
And we appreciate that. So obviously you guys kicked off, I believe it was at 2017 or 20, was that
2017
kind of inception date? So 3 years, obviously a lot of things are happening during this time. What was like maybe like that, because I don't always talk about the big wins, but what was that kind of initial, like that small win? You're like, wow, we were able to accomplish this. For you guys as like a startup.
Yeah, so I mean, end of 2016 was a really dark period. Our team had gone without salaries for a substantial amount of time. I had been without a paycheck for like 16 months. We were all accustomed to having good paychecks wherever we were. And, we still hadn't launched the service. globally, and it felt really gloomy. It felt like, you know, what could have been the
Yeah.
final thing that made us break completely. And somewhere around Christmas, our lead technologist Jimmy decides, you know, without telling us, that he's going to build the iOS app over the Christmas break. We had an Android version out already, and he did so, and I was able to rustle up some money, around $1 million, from friends and family,
Wow.
which angel investors or seed investors or whatever you want to call it. And with that money, I promised the investors that, you know, I'm going to show you guys what we can do. We're going to find talent. The app is going to, you know, resonate with artists around the world. We're going to be able to sign something and make money. And we did so in a couple of months' time. But, you know, all of those kind of success stories that happened after this wouldn't have been able to happen had we not kind of powered on through those really, really dark days in the end of 2016. So I think, yeah, that was probably one of those moments that was instrumental for us.
Yeah, you know, I think we can all kind of speak to that, whether you're a young entrepreneur or artist that's still obviously focused on their career, hasn't necessarily broken yet,
Yeah.
and kind of finding that little window where, you know, you had that holiday period where, you know, he built the iOS app, you were able to raise some money, and like this is a basketball analogy, like fourth quarter,
Yeah.
just lock in,
Yeah.
win the game, and I think that's important. Just kind of persevere for a lot of people, because you're gonna feel like you're behind. You know, your back is against the wall. I've been
Yeah.
in this position numerous times, and just, you know, I think having the right people around you, I think it's super important to make sure, like, your frame of mind, you don't get lost and just focused at the task at hand, because obviously starting a company is a huge task. But you've been able to do it, and, you know.
Yeah, man. No, and I agree with you. I mean, it's like, you know, I don't want to sound stupid, but when the going gets tough, the tough get going somehow. And, you know, we were definitely in a couple of those tough spots over the last couple of years, up against really, really solid competition on all fronts, and, you know, running into challenges like, you know, running out of funds, or, you know, whatever it could be. It's definitely a time when you got to dig deep, and if you really believe in what you're doing, you can probably find you know, a second wind or a third wind, and keep at it even when it feels really tough. And but there's nothing to prepare you for it. There's no way of knowing if you're going to get through it or not. So there's really nothing that I can offer as kind of help to anyone who finds themselves struggling, other than just the comfort that a lot of these things you are able to push through, and when you get through them, it feels really good. So look forward to that feeling and focus on that.
Yeah, no, that's something that I wanted just to point out, just because I feel like the music community as a whole, we're constantly face challenges. I think we're problem solvers.
Yeah, definitely.
Daily problem solvers, because we have to create music, we have to figure out how to, like, connect with fans. You know, I think artists and creators, they want to create the best work. So there's a lot of just like creating these things and trying to solve problems. And no, it's an important trait. So as this is all is happening, I definitely want to talk about, you know, obviously more so all the different milestones you guys have been, you know, obviously accomplishing, from the advance, you know, payment to obviously Amuse Pro. And just kind of just talk about that from an artist standpoint, because we have a lot of independent artists in our community, and love to kind of dive into the details so they can learn more about Amuse.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I was actually I had a conversation with one of my colleagues the other day, and we're just talking, you know, and one of the things that struck me was that our journey is perhaps different to some of the other distributors out there, because some of the other distributors, and I don't know what, you know, what fuels the people who work there, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know so many of those people, but their distribution services, they've been doing roughly the same thing from the beginning. They've been moving a song from an artist into the different music services, which is, you know, incredibly powerful. I think one of the insights that we had during our conversation was that Amuse has never kind of been one thing. It's always been moving. It's always been changing. And the reason why it's been doing that is because we've been working so closely with the artists who have participated in our journey from the beginning. They've been kind of telling us what they need, and we've been building that. So, so our service perhaps started with a fairly basic idea, which was, you know, put the song into your phone and, or, you know, access it from your Google Drive or whatever, and then we'll move it into the different services and we'll collect your revenues. And nowadays it's so many more things. So if you're an independent artist, you know, you're probably working with a small team, and you're probably, you know, hacking away at your process and trying to get really fantastic music out there and be as successful as you can be. And that's the type of a use case that we envision with where we are today. So Amuse today is a result of this whole journey and all the stuff that we've learned along it. So, you know, nowadays the independent artist is more sophisticated than he or she was when we started our journey, and that's reflected in our technology. So what we offer today is a suite of services. So essentially, you and your team can upload the music. You can, you know, access multiple artist accounts. You can give different types of permissions to your account, so people can view it differently. You can split royalties between the different creators on the project. All of this is incredibly important to artists, modern artists. And then on top of that, we advance money. So instead of, you know, having to work an extra job or whatever, you can use the money that you're already making from your music and give yourself an advance in a really, really cool way through the app or on the web. And it's all these different services that are aimed to just allow independent artists to stay independent. That's one of our main motivations. So it's going to continue to evolve like that. And I think it's important because people look at us and we're adding this and we're adding that, and they're like, what are you guys up to really? And we're like, dude, we're just trying to make sure that these artists can continue to do what they love. And we're trying to figure out new ways for them to be able to do that with as little hassle as possible, to allow them to completely focus on their music career. And if we can be that tool, those multiple tools that they use from time to time differently, you know, whatever, then I think we can find a really good relationship between ourselves and independent artists around the world.
Yeah, no, that's super important. I think empowerment of independent artists.
Agreed.
You know, and to your point, across the world, just because there's so much talent across the world that I think just at least in the US, we're not aware of, right? I think globally, obviously, there's so many artists creating from their bedroom, you know, to the beach, like wherever they're creating music. But that's what always inspired about me kind of getting into this space, is because it's such a universal language that I, you know, once this quarantine is over, I want to definitely travel like you, meet all these different creatives and stuff. But that's amazing. And I'm sure, like, we're going to, after this podcast is over, we're going to make sure all the information is in the YouTube description, and obviously, you know, have a link to the Amuse platform, make sure people can download it. So we're about to wrap up. I wanted to ask you two things. One, obviously we're in this pandemic. How have you guys kind of pivoted a little bit in terms of just the way that you approach marketing now, given, you know, obviously everything's digital? And then two, we talked about lessons learned. What's one lesson learned that we haven't spoken about that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, well, as far as pivoting goes, we've always been a digital business. I think there was nothing major happened the day when we decided to close the office. I mean, I miss a lot of the people in the office, miss seeing their faces and talking over a cup of coffee or whatever, or miss traveling and those things. But our business was already built for working remotely, so there wasn't a real challenge in that. I guess the biggest change in how we market was that we weren't able to do all of these cool events we wanted to do with you guys, or things we were planning for South by, or we were doing events and I don't know, God knows where, a bunch of different places, and interacting with people and allowing them to see our products and see us face to face. So I think that's missing. So we needed to just focus even further on the digital side of it, and a lot of that has turned into different types of storytelling and trying to make sure we engage the audiences as much as we can, because obviously there's a big fight for people's attention in the digital realm right now, when everyone is gearing up and going all in on digital. So we've been figuring out a bunch of different ways of interacting with the artists, but I think those will just become our new normal, even though we at some point will get back to how life used to be. I think all of these lessons that we've learned now will become a part of our toolbox going forward as well. As far as lessons go that I haven't shared yet, I think one of the things that people talk to me or ask me about a lot, especially from an entrepreneurial point of view, is like how fundraising and stuff like that goes, or how to go about that. And I think it has a lot of similarities with artist life. So I think it's a valuable lesson, no matter if you're an artist or you're a budding entrepreneur. But I think, I probably spoke to 200 investors or something like that and got turned away everywhere. And I think one of the things that I learned was that, the idea of whatever it is that you're creating will make the most sense to someone if it really makes sense to you, if you're really passionate about it, and if you can articulate that passion and that idea in a good way. And I think that sounds perhaps too simplified, but I think what I had been doing was to try to figure out how other people spoke, or what other people wanted, or what they needed, rather than just trusting in what we were building and what we wanted to communicate. And I think, so for a long time, it was like, I was making Amuse sound like part rocket ship, part, grocery store, and part, shoe company. And it was like, the idea was so much all over the place, trying to cater to whoever I was speaking to, that it kind of lost its soul, or it became less, succinct or clear. And at some point that changed, and it became much more, personal and passionate. And I think if you can translate whatever idea it is you're working on, whether that's your new music project or whether that's your technology project, if you can really boil that down into its core and tell that story, I think that's always going to be the most powerful thing. And then it doesn't matter if you're sending your project to 200 people, or you don't have any listeners initially, or you're meeting 200 investors and they're all turning you away. You got to keep believing in your project, and just keep going at it, and sharpening how you communicate around it all the time. So I think that was definitely one of the biggest lessons in these last couple of years.
No, that's a huge point, because I feel like as an entrepreneur or a music creative, we always put timetables. Obviously put timelines, right, in terms of how we release things, but those answers, those things will always change to the environment. For example, obviously, a lot of our offerings from the Digilogue have been offline based, right? We've done events once a month, but I think with this pandemic, we're also highlighting all the things that we do online too, and it's given us an opportunity to kind of like showcase that. Kind of showcasing how well-rounded we can be. And to your point, it's just, there's always change. I think you can't necessarily get the core answer then and there, but I've always appreciated different iterations of how your company has grown, how the Digilogue has grown. And I think for artists, how their music will grow. There's no just like absolute. I think there's room for improvement and change.
Agreed, 100%.
Yeah, but Diego, I appreciate you, man. This is we've been wanting to do this for a minute. Podcast. Obviously, we always have conversations, but it's really cool just to like have someone that's running this amazing music tech company. You've been super accessible, and your knowledge, I think, is going to inspire not only just the entrepreneurs, but also just the artists independent artists that are looking for, you know, that music distribution platform that really is for them.
Yeah.
And you guys are that. I can't appreciate you obviously sharing your time on a Saturday. More importantly, for our Digilogue community, be safe out there. Make sure to follow Amuse. We're gonna have their socials on our description. Make sure to follow Diego and all the things he's doing. Once this is over, he's gonna probably visit you at your respective country. But I appreciate you so much for sharing your time today for
Thank
that.
you. Thank you so much to you and to the Digilogue family, which has always been more than you, of course. And
Yeah,
yeah, I'm hoping to see you soon and hang out over or a couple of tacos or something like that. So
I know.
yeah, thank you so much for having me,
Yeah,
and thank you for listening to a little bit about the Amuse story.
perfect. All right, man. Thanks, Diego.